Hello my friend, welcome back to the Ascended Spiritual Warrior. Today's near-death experience comes from a man named Patsy who collapsed just outside her home and a neighbor came to help her. What happens next is truly amazing. If this is your first time on our channel, welcome. I appreciate you being here. These videos are meant to build faith in a world that seems to be faithless and to prove that there is life on the other side. If you enjoy these videos, then please click the like, subscribe and bell icon so you'll get notified of any new out-of-body experience and near-death experience stories we upload. For our returning viewers, you know what to do. Grab a beverage, sit back, relax and enjoy today's story. I want to tell you a little about my background and then tell you about my near-death experience. I was born in Kansas in the heart of the Bible Belt. I was raised a devout Christian. I had been baptized by the age of 12 and taught the words of God. All the concepts of heaven and hell as taught in the Bible, all of which I accepted and certainly believed. To me, it was the gospel truth. I was very religious. I make a point of this because I did not have the normal near-death experience, which is unusual when you consider my background. By 1965, I was the mother of 4 children and the wife of a lineman for the power company, and to make ends meet, I was working in a drive-in restaurant. I was a deaconess and a Sunday school teacher in my church. My life revolved around my family, my church, and my home. In my spare time, I bowled twice a week in a bowling league. I began to have trouble with my left leg. It would give out and I could not stand on it. I went to my doctor and he recommended having the vein stripped in my left leg. He assured me it was elective surgery and I would be in the hospital only 3 days. The following week the operation went as planned with no complications. The next day I got up and walked around. The only thing I remember that was unusual was that twice I found myself on the floor with no memory of how I got there. On the 3rd day, I went home feeling fine. The following day, I went over to my neighbor, Paul, for a cup of tea. We were sitting there and suddenly I began to feel strange. I told Paul that I would go home and lie down for a while. She said she would walk with me. I told her no, that I was alright and that I would see her later. It was about 2:30 p.m. I walked across the street and up a short embankment into the middle of the carport. Suddenly, I was floating above my body, which was lying in the carport. I had no sense of movement and I was afraid. I was fully conscious. I looked down and wondered why my body was lying on the ground and I was in the air. I thought it was interesting how my body looked. I had never seen my body from this view before. Shirley, the neighbor across the street, saw me fall and she came running over calling to Pearl. She and Pearl picked up my body, carried it into the house and put it down on the bed where, still floating, I perched on the headboard looking at my 4 children who stood at the foot of the bed watching the unsuccessful attempts being made to resuscitate my body. Pearl told my daughter to call for an ambulance. She went into the living room and called them. My body voided always and they were trying to clean it up. They removed all the clothing except for a t-shirt. The ambulance came and 2 attendants came in, put my body on a stretcher and carried it out to the ambulance. They told Pearl to get in. She told them that I had just come home from the hospital the day before. Shirley said she would tell Bill, my husband, to meet us at the hospital. As they placed my body in the ambulance, I floated along with it. I was not attached to it in any way that I could determine. I just thought everything was so interesting. The driver turned on the siren as we started for the hospital. The attendant began trying to revive my body. Pearl was telling him what had happened as he was trying to find a pulse. He put an oxygen mask over my body's mouth and applied electric shocks to the chest 3 times, each time taking a pulse. Halfway to the hospital, he stopped and told the driver to turn off the siren. I was dead. Pearl started crying. I turned around and was immersed in light. I was surrounded by unconditional love and total acceptance. I knew I was complete at last. Never had I felt such safety and serenity before. Suddenly, I had all knowledge. All that I had ever heard or known was swept away. I knew that Christ had not died on the cross and that there is no sin or evil. I knew that I had existed since the moment of creation, that I shall always exist, and that all consciousness is in the act of becoming. I knew that I had lived many times in physical reality, and I watched those expressions and observed each of them. I experienced what we mean when we say that we have free will and that we choose everything. There are no absolutes. I watched every thought I had ever chosen to its natural end and each person it had touched. I knew that I was and had always been a speaker, which meant I carried information between entities and their expressions. I was in physical reality because it is time for the physical being to mature and accept responsibility for their creation and to realize that they create their reality. I knew then that I must return because my role was not finished yet. Also, I saw my own death in 2010, drowning in my own body fluids. I gained the knowledge that all people choose their time and create the method of their demise. I turned around and I was in the hospital emergency room. Bill, Pearl, the ambulance attendants, 2 policemen were there. A nurse standing at the head of the table on which my body was lying covered with a sheet. The doctor was in a rage, telling Bill that I had died from extreme malnutrition often brought about by women dieting in order to make themselves thin. He insinuated that my husband was to blame. Bill was trying to explain to him that he had just taken me home from that hospital only the day before, and it was impossible for me to have died under those circumstances. I floated over my body and sank down into it. I want to tell you what it felt like when I entered my body. I have never felt such joy. I was enthralled with the wondrous body I had created. I could feel the consciousness of each cell in my body. I could feel the joy of the blood as it rushed through the veins and the sharing of the creation of new life as each cell sang its energy. I truly knew what the phrase, "I sang the body electric" meant. I was so captivated by this wondrous creation which all of me had created and the loving cooperation that existed between all the cells that had joined together to create this marvelous body called Patsy. I joined in the song of life, thanked each of them, and praised them. I could feel the energy as it traveled through my nerve paths to its destination. How alive and vital this body was. What a marvelous creation it was, and how well it worked together in perfect synchronization in its exuberant celebration of life. As long as I wear this body, I will never forget what I had experienced in that moment. My body begins to shake and the sheet fell to the floor. The nurse screamed. The doctor ran to the table. I sat up trying to get off the table. I wanted to dance and sing for the sheer joy of being alive. He pushed me down on the table and told the nurse to get a sedative. I struggled to get up. I told the doctor that I was all right and I didn't need a sedative. Suddenly I realized I knew what everybody was thinking and they were all terrified. I calmed down and laid still. He was terrified to even touch me. The nurse did not want to approach the table again. Everyone in the room were frozen in place, as if their brains could not process what their eyes were observing. I became aware that I was ravenous. I told the doctor that I needed food. He sent for an orderly to take me up to a room. Then he went over to the desk and began to fill out papers. I could see that he could not think about what had just happened. He was afraid of me. The orderly came and wheeled my gunny into the elevator. As I was chatting away with the orderly, I noticed Bill was staying as far away from me as possible. I knew in some way I had to help Bill because he had to go home and tell our children what had happened. I told Bill that I was alright and I wanted him to go home and just tell the children that I would be home tomorrow. He never said a word. He just leaned over, kissed me, and took the elevator back down. The orderly told the floor nurse that all of them in the emergency room acted as if they had just seen a ghost. She laughed, asking me if I too had seen the ghost. I answered no and asked for something to eat and drink. She glanced at the clock behind the nurse station, which showed 10:04 p.m. She told me that the kitchen was closed for the night, but she would see what she could find for me. I was then put in a ward with 2 other women. She left the room. I immediately woke my roommates up. I was so happy to be with the people who would, or perhaps could, react to me in a normal fashion that I started singing, dancing around the room, telling jokes. The nurse returned with the promised food and told me to get into bed and be quiet or she would have to strap me down. So I did. The women went back to sleep and I lay awake all night. I read every mind in the hospital and wandered through everyone's dreams. To the ones who were dying, I helped them to live and explained to them where they were going. To the babies who had just entered this reality, I had long conversations and they told me why they had chosen to come and why they had chosen their parents. To those who were frightening and suffering, I helped them to see that they really chose the suffering and they had to choose not to suffer because it was not necessary. The next morning, a neurologist came in and asked me many questions. He poked me with a needle. I read his mind and told him what he wanted to hear. He left thinking he had been right, that I just had an emotional event that was caused by stress and he would recommend bed rest. I had planted these suggestions in his mind. That afternoon, my surgeon came in and sat down and asked me what happened. I read his mind and knew that he knew I had died. I told him he would not believe me. He said, yes, I would. I have to go before a board of my peers and tell them what happened and why I released you to go home. I am a surgeon and every day I face my enemy death across my operating table, and the more I can understand about him, the better I am able to help my patients. I have had 500 patients experience death and live to tell about it, and I'm not moving until you tell me what happened. So I told him. He told me that my file would be placed with the others and destroyed upon his death. I asked him what I should do and he said, I don't know. Your life will completely change and I don't know how to tell you to live it. Where are the others who experienced this? He told me he could not tell me. He told me not to tell anyone what had happened or they would put me away. I told him I could read his mind and he said yes, that he knew that. He said that in time I would lose this ability, but at first it would help me to adjust to my new awareness. He told me that I had been officially dead for 1 hour and he said he thought it was more than several hours. I went home that day. I never saw him again. He died 2 years later. He was right. My world had turned upside down. I went to the church next Sunday and couldn't even sit through the service. I wanted to stand up and tell everyone that this was all wrong and how wonderful they were. The ability to read minds stayed with me for almost a month and then slowly faded into the background. I now use it in my role as a speaker. I begin a search for others like me. I explored the psychic community and found that they, too, taught that people were victims and powerless. If you constantly seek your answers outside yourself, you will never find wisdom. You already have all the answers, so you always must look within. In 1974, I was told by a palm reader to go to Lacey, Washington, to a certain house and I would find my voice. I went, and when I arrived, I knocked on the door and a young man opened the door. He told me to come in and that Jean would be back in a few minutes. 15 minutes later, Jean entered and I recognized him. He had been my tutor when I was in Atlantis and had used his students to gain advantage over his enemies. He said, "I have been waiting for you." He took me down to the basement to his library and gave me the book Seth Speaks. He told me this would give me the language I needed for my work. I went home and read it, and it was exactly what I had learned in the light. Jean died 2 years later from a brain tumor. For 2 years, he helped me prepare myself for my role as a speaker. I have all of Seth's books and I have searched for others since that time. In the years since, I have lived the principles I learned in the light. I only sleep 4 hours a day now, which is the usual for me. I have never slept more than 5 hours at a time. I have no fear of death. I live in the moment. I am in excellent health and create what I want. I do not use drugs, alcohol, or have insurance. I have never met a stranger and I don't know what the word shy means. I have never been homesick and I am at home wherever I am. My life has been a grand adventure. I stand between two worlds and move easily between them.